Hey, it's Matt from Hidden Machine here, and today I want to talk about difficulty in games. Personally speaking, I don't think it should be controversial to say that every person doesn't need access to everything. And I'm not talking about things like healthcare or clean drinking water or 5G radiation poisoning. I'm talking about video games. Generally speaking, experiencing the full story, the ending, and everything in between that a game has to offer is the reward that you receive for completing a game. This is all well and fine until you consider the fact that some people don't possess the time, patience, or ability to develop the skill needed to complete a game. Are these people not entitled to the spoils of victory? Well, personally speaking, I don't always think that they are. And I'm speaking as a person who has enjoyed many games that I've also been unable to complete. But is this an antiquated idea? As a card-carrying certified gamer with over 3 decades of experience, I think that in some ways, it is. Let's use my life in gaming for context here. My earliest gaming memories include a few different arcade cabinets, things like Mousetrap or Pac-Man, and Atari 2600 carts like Mario Bros, Pitfall, Tank, and No Escape. I was a very young child, but I got countless hours of enjoyment out of those games. For these types of games, there was rarely any sort of narrative within the game itself. The stories existed largely in the minds of the players, informed by things like the cover art for the game. Some titles did have a few paragraphs at most explaining the basic plot, but I believe that the majority of people playing these games never really read any of those materials. The concept of beating a game wasn't like it is today. Most games didn't have an ending. You could complete a level, you could win a round, but you couldn't really beat or complete these games. Most games of this era were on a seemingly infinite loop, wherein you complete your objectives, and then do it again with the difficulty slightly increased. Most games would hit a point where a human player would be unable to continue anymore, although people have been able to reach what is called a kill screen in some older games. A kill screen is basically where you go so far into a game that the code can't keep up anymore, the screen becomes garbled with nonsense, and the game becomes unplayable. Kill screens weren't built into these games as a reward for completing them, but rather they are the unintended result of players exceeding the expectations of the designers. A few years after getting an Atari 2600, I was given an NES. Initially, this 8-bit era of gaming wasn't terribly different from the Atari era, especially because a lot of NES games were just ports of arcade games. So again, we didn't really see any sort of deeper plot, story development, or any significant endings to these games. Famously, one of the earliest and most prominent games to break out of that trend was Super Mario Bros. This is a 1985 sequel to the 1983 arcade game, Mario Bros. To illustrate how new the idea of actual story in games was at the time, look at how the manual in Super Mario Bros. Describes the plot. They call it the object of the game/game description. Now, most kids at the time, and I'm sure most people today, would say that Super Mario Bros. Is a game where Mario defeats Bowser in order to save the princess. They probably wouldn't say anything about black magic or field horsehair plants, but the manual actually mentions black magic twice. Now, this is the sort of information that tends to wind up in those 10 things you didn't know about Mario type videos, but the official story is that a tribe of turtles invaded the Mushroom Kingdom and used their black magic to turn all of the inhabitants into things like stones, bricks, and the aforementioned field horsehair plants. And as a quick aside, some people have morbidly interpreted this to mean that every brick you break in Super Mario is actually an inhabitant of the Mushroom Kingdom, and you are literally smashing their transformed bodies into bits. However, the manual clearly states that if Mario comes across mushroom people who have been turned invisible or turned into bricks, they reward him by giving him items like mushrooms and stars. Anyone who's played Mario knows that bricks containing items cannot be destroyed, so we can all stop spreading that misinformation, and please, refer to my video here as proof if you ever get into an argument with one of those Mario brick truthers. Anyway, my point here is that one of the most, if not the most, popular, iconic, and trend-setting games developed for the NES has a plot that has largely been disregarded in favor of a simplified understanding of the narrative based purely on gameplay and the imaginations of the players. The deeper storytelling that was attempted here definitely aligns with this simplified understanding of the story, but the details of the story are basically irrelevant and don't do anything to enhance the experience for the player. And furthermore, you didn't need to beat Super Mario Bros. To enjoy the story. All of this is to say that in the NES era of gaming, story and gameplay had not yet merged in any sort of significant way for the vast majority of games. Super Mario Bros., and I know I keep saying bros and brothers, deal with it, it's a beloved title. Its first level is often pointed to as a perfect execution of game design, in that it presents its mechanics and obstacles in such a way that the player will intuitively begin to understand and apply them. The game set a standard for the platforming genre, and its accolades are impossible to count. And it never had an easy mode, and most of the people who picked it up and enjoyed their time with the game never completed it. So why are so many gamers today asking for more games to have easier difficulty settings? And why are some gamers so opposed to those requests? Since video game consoles first brought gaming into the home, the way games work has been slowly shifting. Arcade games were about quick, obviously finite experiences. As players developed more skill, games became more complex and difficult, and you began to see more and more games that were intentionally designed to be punishingly difficult in an attempt to get more quarters from the players. Home consoles began to change things, and more players were spending more time with games than they ever had the opportunity to before. Throughout the 80s and 90s, we saw the focus of games shift away from what worked in the arcades to experiences that were better suited for the home consoles. At the same time, technological advancements allowed for more data to be put into games, meaning that the stories were no longer separated from the gameplay, but instead were intricately woven into the game, first through the appearance of things like on-screen text and cutscenes, and then through voice-acted dialogue and more immersive environmental storytelling. As this trend continued, we saw more and more titles where the story and gameplay were so intimately connected that for many players, it began to become difficult to enjoy one without enjoying the other. The other part of this whole transformation of stories and plot in gaming is that the storytelling itself has become more intricate and effective as more and more tools become available to developers. To go back a bit, even if all of the story in Super Mario Bros. Was presented to all of the players, even if they added cutscenes, it's still a story that people have heard a million times before. The hero defeats the bad guy to rescue the girl. And for most games of the 80s and 90s, the storytelling never really got more complex than that. And when it did get more complex, it was because those games focused more on storytelling than they did on gameplay. There are so many awesome stories to be found in older point-and-click adventures and RPGs, but those games aren't fun in the same way that a game like Super Mario was fun. They work to accomplish an entirely different set of goals, but over time, this more rich and complex style of storytelling did begin to find its way into other genres, and that's where we're at today. I said at the top of this video that experiencing the full story, the ending, and everything in between that a game has to offer is the reward that you receive for completing a game. But I also said that this was sort of an antiquated idea. For most of the 80s and 90s, if a game had an ending at all, it was usually just a single screen and maybe a brief animation. Sometimes there would be a few lines of text, sometimes your score would determine whether you had a good ending or a bad ending, but in general, you pretty much got a screen saying, "The adventure is over, thank you for playing." And as anticlimactic as these endings might seem today, at the time, they were the reward for completing these games, and people really wanted that reward. In fact, Nintendo even put out a few VHS tapes that were just compilations of the endings of different games. There were also cheat codes and peripherals like the Game Genie that could help players get to the end of a game. So if you weren't skilled enough or didn't have the time to finish a game, there were still ways to experience that ending. And at the time, seeing them was really, really cool. Even if you didn't personally complete the game, seeing the ending of a game represented a certain sort of rare achievement. Games back then weren't meant to be completed, they were meant to be played. It took time for things to evolve from the infinite loop style of gameplay of arcade cabinets to the full-on narrative-driven experiences of today's games. It was very common for players to absolutely love a game, to spend hours and hours with it, and never actually reach the end of that game. I believe that was only possible because the end of a game was irrelevant to the actual gameplay for the majority of titles out there at the time. So, given this background and context, when we look at the landscape today where the majority of games have rich narratives that hook players in, narratives that unfold and expand over the course of a game, it's understandable why being unable to complete the games makes enjoying them more difficult for many people. And while my experience as a gamer is rooted in a time where completing a game was often a sort of rare and elite achievement, that time is over. Part of me really does want to argue that if you want to see the end of a game, you should put in the work to complete it. But I think it'd be wrong of me to not acknowledge that that viewpoint I have comes from a time when it was much easier to just enjoy a game and to never have to think about the story or the ending. For so many games, the ending was just a special reward for certain players, and the games weren't designed in such a way that made reaching that ending crucial to having a fulfilling experience with the game. But for many games today, where the storytelling and gameplay are so connected, not having lower difficulty settings available to players can make the games frustrating in a way that turns people off from wanting to play them at all. There's a lot of different ways to handle this issue. Some games have a story mode for people who just want to experience the story. And some games have mechanics working in the background that dynamically adjust the difficulty based on the performance of the player. Some games have multiple endings, with the most desirable endings being reserved for players of a certain skill level. In some games, an intense level of difficulty and a sort of trial and error gameplay loop is a crucial element of the design, and adding a lower difficulty level would throw off the delicate balance that these sorts of games have created. And it does seem like these sorts of games, the From Software and Souls-like games, are especially subject to criticism when it comes to their lack of an easy mode. But just like back in the 90s, there are tools available that can make the game easier for you if you really just want to experience the story. You can even go on YouTube and watch a full playthrough, or just watch a compilation of the cutscenes. Or you can even watch a guided, in-depth dissection and analysis of the entire game and its story. But at that point, is your goal to enjoy a game like Dark Souls, or is your goal just to see the end of the story? A game as difficult as Dark Souls isn't going to be enjoyed by everyone, but I suspect that an easy mode on a game like Dark Souls wouldn't really be the most enjoyable experience either. And if you don't believe me, try playing through it with a trainer. It might seem backwards and frustrating, but I'm of the opinion that the seemingly insurmountable odds you face in a game like Dark Souls is at the very core of its essence, and removing that leaves you with something kinda boring. I know a lot of people who love the Souls games, but still haven't completed any of them. And I think that goes back to the old school mentality of games not necessarily being about completing them, but rather about being able to enjoy the time spent with them regardless of how far you progress. And I think this is a good time to call back to my other point from the top of this video. I don't think that everyone needs access to everything. I don't think that all games need an easy mode, but I do think that if a game is going to balance itself in such a way that resolving the story and the narrative are crucial to allowing a player to feel fulfilled by their time with the game, then the developers should do what they can to meet players halfway and make that experience enjoyable and fulfilling for everyone. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on the topic of difficulty in games. I'm sure you have your own opinion. I'd like to hear what you have to say, so please meet me down in the comments. Let me know what you think, and if you like this video and you want to see more from myself and the rest of the people here at Hidden Machine, please give us a like, subscribe, and stay tuned. We upload videos every week, and you can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter. The links are down below this video, so check it out. Thanks.